We have been told the same lie, repeated across every culture, every civilization, every generation, that to be alone is to be incomplete, that to walk without the crowd is to walk toward madness. But what if I told you that the greatest minds in history, the ones who shaped our understanding of the human psyche, discovered the opposite? What if the path to true psychological power, to unshakable sovereignty, lies not in the comfort of belonging, but in the terrifying clarity of solitude? Carl Gustav Jung, the architect of analytical psychology, spent his life mapping the deepest territories of the human mind. He understood something that most people will never grasp: that society is not designed to create individuals, it is designed to create replicas. The collective, the group, the herd, these are machines of conformity, grinding down the edges of uniqueness until everyone fits neatly into the same mold. And those who resist, those who choose to remain outside the circle, who keep no friends, who walk the path alone, they are not the broken ones. They are the ones who have seen through the illusion. This is not a video about loneliness. This is a revelation about psychological evolution. Throughout the next 40 minutes, we will descend into the mind of Carl Jung and extract a blueprint for understanding the most misunderstood archetype in human psychology: the loner who keeps no friends. We will explore why these individuals represent not a failure of socialization, but a triumph of consciousness. We will examine the neurobiological, philosophical, and archetypal dimensions of solitude, and by the end, you will understand why the systems that govern society view these individuals as the most dangerous threat to their control. Prepare yourself. The knowledge you are about to receive will fundamentally alter how you perceive social connection, individuality, and the nature of psychological freedom itself. The first and most critical understanding is this: the loner is not someone who failed to socialize. The loner is someone who evolved beyond the need for constant external validation. In evolutionary terms, humans developed as social creatures because cooperation increased survival. The tribe provided protection, resources, shared knowledge. To be exiled was to face death. And so, deep within our limbic system, within the oldest parts of our brain, the fear of social rejection became hardwired into our psychological architecture. This is not weakness. This is ancient programming. But here is what Jung understood that most psychologists miss. Evolution does not stop at the biological level. Consciousness itself evolves. And in certain individuals, a mutation occurs, not in their DNA, but in their psychological structure. They develop what Jung called individuation, the process by which the unconscious is made conscious, by which a person becomes whole unto themselves. This is not antisocial behavior. This is post-social consciousness. The loner who keeps no friends has not failed to connect with others. They have transcended the primitive need to define themselves through the mirror of other people's approval. Consider this carefully. From the moment you were born, you were being programmed. Your parents, your teachers, your peers, the media, every institution you encountered was sending you the same message: conform, fit in, be like everyone else, and you will be safe. You will be loved. You will be accepted. This is the great bargain of socialization. Surrender your uniqueness, and we will give you belonging. For most people, this trade seems reasonable. They never question it. They spend their entire lives performing for an audience, modifying their behavior to match the expectations of others, living according to scripts written by people who died centuries ago. But the loner sees this. They see the invisible chains. They recognize that every social interaction is a negotiation. Every friendship is transactional. Every group is held together not by genuine connection, but by unspoken rules and mutual manipulation. They see that most people are not relating to each other at all. They are relating to masks, to personas, to carefully constructed images. And once you see this, once you truly perceive the mechanical nature of social theater, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to innocent participation. This is the curse and the gift of consciousness. Jung described modern society as suffering from a collective neurosis, a psychological sickness that spreads through social contagion. He observed that when individuals gather in groups, something happens to their consciousness. They regress. They become less rational, more emotional, more susceptible to propaganda and manipulation. The individual mind, with all its complexity and potential, gets absorbed into what he called the collective unconscious, a shared psychic space where everyone thinks the same thoughts, fears the same fears, desires the same desires. This is not metaphor. This is observable psychological reality. Watch what happens when people form crowds. Watch how quickly reasonable individuals become capable of unreasonable acts. Watch how peer pressure can override personal ethics. Watch how the need to belong can make intelligent people believe obvious lies. This is the mechanism by which society controls its members, not through force, but through the existential terror of being cast out, of being alone, of being different. The loner who keeps no friends has developed immunity to this pathology. They have, either through conscious choice or through the necessity of their nature, broken the link between their sense of self and the opinions of others. This is not emotional detachment. This is psychological liberation. They have discovered that the fear of social rejection is just that, a fear, not a reality. And when you face that fear directly, when you walk through it, instead of running from it, you discover something extraordinary. You do not die. Your sense of self does not collapse. In fact, something else happens. You become stronger, more coherent, more real. The mechanism behind this is what neuroscientists call self-regulation. Most people regulate their emotions and their sense of identity through external feedback. They feel good when others approve. They feel bad when others disapprove. Their nervous system is constantly scanning the social environment for cues. Am I safe? Am I accepted? Am I doing this right? This creates a state of perpetual anxiety, a constant vigilance, an exhausting performance that never ends. The loner, by contrast, develops internal regulation. Their sense of stability comes not from the outside world, but from an internal gyroscope. They have taught their nervous system a different truth, that approval and disapproval from others are just noise, data points that may or may not be useful, but which have no bearing on their fundamental worth or their sense of reality. This is not sociopathy. The sociopath lacks empathy, lacks the capacity to feel connection. The sovereign loner possesses empathy, but chooses not to outsource their psychological stability to others. They can observe social dynamics, can understand the emotions and motivations of others, can even participate in social interactions when necessary. But they do not need these interactions to feel whole. They do not derive their sense of identity from membership in any group. This makes them extraordinarily difficult to control, to manipulate, to predict. And this is precisely why society fears them. Consider what happens when you observe social interactions from the outside, when you are not invested in the outcome, when you have no emotional stake in being accepted. You see patterns, you see the games people play, the unspoken rules, the hidden motivations. You see that most human interaction is not about communication, it is about positioning. People are not exchanging information, they are establishing hierarchy, testing boundaries, seeking advantage. Every conversation has subtext. Every relationship has a power dynamic. Every group has an invisible structure of dominance and submission. The loner who keeps no friends becomes a dangerous observer. They watch the social theater without being part of the cast. They decode the body language, the vocal tonality, the micro-expressions that reveal what people really mean beneath what they say. They recognize the manipulation tactics, the emotional blackmail, the subtle coercion that passes for normal interaction. And because they are not emotionally dependent on these interactions, they cannot be manipulated by them. They see the puppet strings. And once you see the strings, you can never again believe the puppet is real. Jung made a critical distinction that most people fail to understand: the difference between solitude and loneliness. Loneliness is a state of suffering, a painful awareness of isolation, a desperate hunger for a connection that goes unfulfilled. It is the experience of someone who wants to belong but cannot. Solitude, by contrast, is a state of power. It is chosen isolation, intentional separation, a deliberate withdrawal from the noise of society into the clarity of self-reflection. Loneliness is a prison. Solitude is a sanctuary. The loner who keeps no friends has transformed loneliness into solitude. They have alchemized suffering into strength. This transformation is not easy. It requires facing the deepest fears of human psychology, the fear of abandonment, the fear of insignificance, the fear of being forgotten. Most people never face these fears. They spend their entire lives running from them, surrounding themselves with people, filling every moment with noise, never allowing themselves to sit in the silence and confront the question, "Who am I?" when no one is watching. This question is terrifying because the answer requires you to strip away every identity you have borrowed from others. You are not your job title. You are not your social role. You are not your relationships, your achievements, your possessions. All of these are external constructs, masks you wear to navigate the social world. But beneath the masks, beneath the conditioning, beneath the accumulated layers of other people's expectations, who are you? This is the journey of individuation that Jung described, and it can only be undertaken alone. The loner who keeps no friends has ventured into this territory. They have descended into what Jung called the shadow, the dark, repressed parts of the psyche that society teaches us to deny. In the group, surrounded by others, you can avoid your shadow, you can project it onto others, you can distract yourself with social drama, you can maintain the illusion that you are purely good, purely righteous, purely civilized. But in solitude, there is nowhere to hide. You must confront every dark impulse, every shameful thought, every aspect of yourself that you have spent your life pretending does not exist. This confrontation is what Jung called shadow integration. It is the process of acknowledging and accepting the totality of your nature, the light and the dark, the civilized and the primal, the angel and the beast. Most people never complete this process because it requires a level of honesty that is unbearable when you are constantly performing for others. But the loner, alone with themselves, has no choice. They must face it. And when they do, when they integrate the shadow instead of repressing it, they achieve something that terrifies the collective: psychological sovereignty. Psychological sovereignty means you cannot be shamed, you cannot be guilted, you cannot be manipulated through your fear of social judgment because you have already judged yourself, already accepted yourself, already integrated every part of your nature that society demands you reject. You become uncontrollable, not because you are rebellious, but because the primary mechanism of social control, shame, ostracism, the threat of exclusion, no longer works on you. You have already excluded yourself. You have already walked away from the group. What more can they do to you? There comes a moment in every loner's journey, a specific point of no return that Jung understood intimately because he experienced it himself. It is what we might call the snap of clarity, the moment when you see the cost of belonging so clearly that you can no longer pay it. You look around at the people in your life, at the relationships you have maintained, at the social obligations you have fulfilled, and you realize none of this is real. None of these connections are authentic. You have been performing a role, playing a character, living someone else's script. And the price of maintaining this performance is nothing less than your soul. This moment is devastating. It is the death of illusions. It is the collapse of the social self. But it is also liberation, because in that moment of clarity, you make a choice. Not a choice between connection and isolation, but a choice between integrity and inclusion. And if you are one of these rare individuals, one of these psychological mutants who value truth above comfort. You choose integrity. You choose to walk away from relationships that require you to be false, from groups that demand you suppress your nature, from a society that punishes authenticity and rewards conformity. This choice makes you dangerous, not because you are violent, not because you are antisocial, but because you have discovered something that threatens the entire structure of social control. You have discovered that you do not need them. And a person who does not need the group cannot be controlled by the group. They cannot be bribed with acceptance. They cannot be threatened with rejection. They have passed through the fire of social death and discovered that they survive, more than survive. They thrive. Society, any society, whether democratic or totalitarian, capitalist or communist, is fundamentally a system of control. It must be. Civilization requires coordination, and coordination requires that individuals surrender some degree of autonomy to the collective will. This is not inherently evil. It is necessary for large-scale cooperation. But the system has a blind spot, a vulnerability, and that vulnerability is the individual who refuses to be coordinated, who will not surrender their autonomy, who insists on thinking their own thoughts and living by their own values. These individuals are statistical anomalies. In any population, the vast majority will conform. They will absorb the cultural programming, will accept the social contract, will live within the boundaries that society establishes. But a small percentage, perhaps 1 or 2%, will not. They will resist, not through rebellion, not through opposition, but through simple non-participation. They will opt out. They will become loners who keep no friends. And the system, which depends on universal participation, views them as threats. Why? Because freedom is contagious. When one person demonstrates that it is possible to live outside the system, outside the herd, others begin to question. They begin to wonder, if that person can survive alone, why can't I? If that person has rejected the social contract and seems happier, freer, more authentic, what does that say about the life I'm living? This is the real danger. Not that the loner will harm anyone, but that the loner's mere existence destabilizes the psychological foundation upon which social control depends. Jung understood this dynamic deeply. He spent years studying totalitarian movements, religious cults, mass psychology. He saw how easily the individual consciousness gets absorbed into collective thinking. He saw how dictators rise not through force alone, but through offering people the comfort of belonging, the security of conformity, the relief of not having to think for themselves. And he understood that the antidote to totalitarianism, to collective psychosis, to the loss of human consciousness, was not better social systems. It was the cultivation of individuals who could stand alone. Every person in society is running a kind of mental operating system, a set of beliefs, assumptions, and behaviors that they downloaded from their culture. Most people never question this operating system. They simply accept it as reality. They believe what they are told to believe, desire what they are told to desire, fear what they are told to fear. This is not stupidity. This is normal psychological functioning. The human brain is designed to absorb and replicate the patterns of the surrounding culture. It is efficient. It allows rapid learning and social cohesion. But the loner who keeps no friends has done something extraordinary. They have rejected the default operating system. They have stopped accepting cultural downloads. They have begun to write their own code, to develop their own framework for understanding reality. This is incredibly difficult because it means questioning everything, including the questioning itself. It means accepting that you might be wrong, that your perceptions might be distorted, that your conclusions might be incomplete. But it also means that your thoughts are genuinely yours. You are not reciting someone else's script. You are not parroting someone else's beliefs. You are thinking authentically and independently for the first time. This is what Jung meant by individuation. It is the process of becoming an individual, of separating your consciousness from the collective unconscious, of developing a unique, coherent, integrated self that is not dependent on external validation or cultural programming. And it can only happen in solitude. You cannot individuate in a group because the group reinforces conformity. You cannot discover who you are when you are constantly becoming what others want you to be. But here is the paradox that Jung recognized. The goal of individuation is not permanent isolation. The loner who keeps no friends is not meant to remain forever separate from humanity. They are undergoing a transformation, a psychological metamorphosis. Jung called this figure the hermit, the archetype of the wise person who withdraws from society to gain knowledge, then returns to share it. The hermit's isolation is temporary, purposeful, necessary. It is the chrysalis stage of psychological evolution. The hermit returns to society, but transformed. They re-enter the social world, but they are no longer of it. They can participate in relationships, can engage in meaningful connection, can contribute to collective endeavors, but they do so from a position of sovereignty rather than dependence. They choose connection rather than need it. They offer authenticity rather than performance. They relate to others as whole beings relating to other whole beings, not as fragments seeking completion through external validation. This is the ultimate threat to social control, the sovereign individual who can move through society without being absorbed by it, who can maintain psychological independence while engaging in authentic relationship. They cannot be bought, cannot be intimidated, cannot be shamed into conformity. And yet they are not hostile, not rebellious, not opposed to society. They simply operate from a different center, a different source of authority. They have replaced the external authorities, the boss, the leader, the group, the culture, with an internal authority, the self. In Jungian psychology, the self with a capital S is distinct from the ego. The ego is the conscious personality, the I that you identify with. But the self is something deeper, something that transcends the ego. It is the organizing principle of the entire psyche, the source of wisdom and integration. Most people never access the self because they are too busy listening to external voices, too busy conforming to external expectations. But in the silence of solitude, when all the external noise falls away, the self can finally be heard. The loner who keeps no friends has created the conditions necessary to hear this voice. In the absence of social distraction, in the void of external validation, they have been forced to find an internal compass. And this compass, this connection to the self, provides a kind of guidance that is qualitatively different from social or cultural programming. It operates through what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, intuitive insights, symbolic guidance that cannot be explained through rational cause and effect logic. When you live according to the self rather than the ego, when you navigate reality through internal meaning rather than external rules, life becomes a different experience altogether. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is trying to emerge through me?" You stop seeking approval and start seeking authenticity. You stop trying to fit in and start allowing yourself to stand out. This is not arrogance. This is alignment with a deeper order, a more fundamental truth than the arbitrary rules of social convention. The silence that the loner inhabits is not empty. It is full of signals that are drowned out by social noise. In solitude, you begin to notice patterns. You begin to sense connections between events that seem unrelated. You begin to receive information through channels that society does not acknowledge: intuition, dreams, bodily sensations, emotional resonance. Jung spent his life mapping these channels, demonstrating that they are not mystical nonsense, but legitimate sources of psychological information. This is what we might call the alchemy of silence, the transformation of absence into presence, of isolation into insight. The loner who keeps no friends is not deprived of information. They are accessing a different bandwidth, one that operates below the frequency of social interaction. They are learning to read the symbolic language of the unconscious, to decode the messages that their deeper self is constantly transmitting. This gives them access to creativity, to innovation, to solutions that those trapped in conventional thinking cannot reach. Consider the neurobiology of this transformation. Recent research in social neuroscience has revealed something fascinating. The human brain has two distinct networks that operate in opposition to each other. The first is the social brain, regions that activate when we are thinking about other people, navigating social situations, managing relationships. The second is the default mode network, regions that activate when we are alone, when we are engaged in self-reflection, when we are allowing our minds to wander freely. Here is the critical finding. These networks cannot operate simultaneously. When one is active, the other is suppressed. When you are socially engaged, your capacity for deep self-reflection is inhibited. When you are in solitude, your social processing is offline. Most people spend the majority of their time in social mode, constantly interacting, constantly connected, constantly stimulated. They never allow their default mode network to fully activate, never give themselves the space for the kind of deep processing that produces original thought and psychological integration. The loner who keeps no friends has, by necessity or by choice, shifted their neurological baseline. They spend more time in default mode, more time in self-reflection, more time in the deep processing that most people avoid. And over time, this changes the structure of their brain. Their capacity for independent thought increases. Their need for external validation decreases. Their dopamine pathways shift from social reward to internal reward, from seeking approval to seeking truth. This is not better or worse than the social mode. It is simply different. It produces a different kind of consciousness, a different kind of intelligence. The socially connected person excels at collaboration, at reading social cues, at navigating complex interpersonal dynamics. The loner excels at analysis, at synthesis, at penetrating to the core of problems that others cannot even perceive. Both are necessary. Both are valuable. But society rewards only one and pathologizes the other. We have reached the halfway point of our journey into the psychology of the loner. Let us pause to understand what we have established thus far. We have seen that the loner who keeps no friends is not a failed social being, but an evolved psychological entity. We have explored Jung's understanding of individuation, the process by which a person separates from the collective unconscious and develops sovereignty. We have examined the neurobiological basis for this transformation, the shift from external to internal regulation, from social dopamine to self-generated stability. We have understood that society views these individuals as threats because they have discovered immunity to the primary mechanism of social control, the fear of exclusion. We have seen how solitude, when embraced rather than feared, becomes a forge for psychological strength, for shadow integration, for the development of an internal compass that cannot be manipulated by external forces. But this is merely the foundation. What we have discussed thus far is the defensive position, understanding who the loner is and why they have chosen this path. Now, we move into more complex territory. Now we explore the offensive capabilities, the active powers that the sovereign individual develops through their isolation. The next phase of our exploration deals not just with survival outside the herd, but with mastery over psychological forces that most people do not even know exist. The knowledge we are about to examine is not for everyone. It requires that you have already accepted the premise that solitude can be a path to power rather than a symptom of dysfunction. If you are still clinging to the belief that human worth is measured by social popularity, that happiness requires constant connection, that being alone means being broken, then what follows will not resonate with you. But if you have felt the pull toward solitude, if you have sensed that there is something beyond the social theater, if you have wondered whether the loners you have known possess a secret that society does not want you to discover, then continue. Because we are about to decode the advanced psychology of the sovereign self. The first advanced capability that the loner develops is what we might call the sovereign persona. Jung made a distinction between the persona, the mask we wear in social situations, and the self, the authentic core of our being. For most people, the persona is a tool of deception, a false face they present to gain acceptance. They believe they are their persona. They have identified so completely with the mask that they no longer remember there is a face underneath. But the sovereign loner understands the persona differently. They see it not as their identity, but as a tool. They recognize that when they do engage with society, when they do participate in social interactions, they need a functional interface. The persona becomes like a spacesuit, necessary equipment for operating in an environment that is not their natural habitat, but not something they confuse with their actual self. This distinction is critical. When you know that your persona is a tool rather than your identity, you can modify it strategically without losing your sense of self. You can present different faces in different contexts, professional, casual, formal, intimate, not because you are being fake, but because you understand that different situations require different interfaces. You are not being manipulative. You are being adaptive. You are recognizing that the social world is a game with specific rules, and while you do not identify with the game, you can play it when necessary without getting trapped in it. This makes the sovereign loner extraordinarily effective in social situations precisely because they are not emotionally invested in the outcomes. They can negotiate without being attached to winning. They can observe without being triggered. They can participate without being absorbed. Others sense this quality but cannot quite identify it. The loner seems calm, centered, mysteriously immune to the social pressures that affect everyone else. This is not aloofness. This is freedom. Consider the environment we now inhabit, the digital hive mind, social media, constant connectivity, algorithmic curation of information. This is not merely technology. This is a new form of collective consciousness, one that operates at unprecedented scale and speed. Billions of people, all connected, all seeing the same content, all being shaped by the same algorithms, all being nudged toward the same conclusions. This is the collective unconscious on steroids, and it is far more powerful than anything Jung could have imagined. The masses are being synchronized, their thoughts homogenized, their behaviors predicted and controlled with increasing precision, not through overt coercion, but through the subtle manipulation of information environments, through the exploitation of psychological vulnerabilities, through the hijacking of attention, and the manufacture of outrage. Most people do not realize this is happening. They believe they are thinking their own thoughts, making their own choices, forming their own opinions, but they are not. They are being played like instruments in an orchestra they cannot see. The loner who keeps no friends has an enormous advantage in this environment. They are not plugged in, or if they are plugged in, they are not dependent on it for their sense of reality. They do not need the constant validation of likes and shares. They do not derive their understanding of the world from what is trending. They do not allow algorithms to curate their perception of reality. They maintain what we might call digital sovereignty, the capacity to engage with technology without being absorbed by it, to use these tools without becoming tools themselves. This is becoming increasingly rare. We are witnessing the emergence of what might be called the networked self, an identity that exists primarily through its connections, its visibility, its social presence. People who cannot form a thought without posting it, cannot have an experience without documenting it, cannot hold an opinion without checking whether it aligns with their group. This is not connection. This is dissolution. It is the loss of individual consciousness into the digital collective. The sovereign loner resists this dissolution. They understand that their consciousness is the most valuable thing they possess, and they will not allow it to be colonized by external forces, whether those forces are social pressure or algorithmic manipulation. They maintain what Jung called psychic boundaries, the capacity to determine where they end and the world begins, what is theirs and what belongs to others. Without these boundaries, there is no individual. There is only the hive. But maintaining these boundaries requires passing through what we might call the void, the transition period between leaving the group and finding the self. This is the most dangerous phase of the loner's journey, the time when loneliness has not yet transformed into solitude, when the old identities have been stripped away, but new ones have not yet emerged. This is the dark night of the soul that mystics have described for millennia. This is the death that must occur before rebirth. Most people cannot tolerate the void. When they feel it approaching, when they sense the emptiness beneath the social mask, they panic. They immediately seek distraction, connection, anything to fill the space. They rush back into relationships, into groups, into activities that prevent them from having to sit with themselves. This is why most people never individuate. They never complete the journey because they cannot endure the void. But the void is not the enemy. The void is the teacher. In that space of nothingness, where all external reference points have fallen away, where you have no one to perform for and nothing to distract you, the real work of transformation occurs. You are forced to confront the fundamental questions. Who am I without my roles? What do I value without social approval? What is my purpose without external validation? These questions cannot be answered intellectually. They can only be answered through experience, through sitting in the discomfort until something deeper emerges. What emerges is what Jung called the archetype of the self, not the ego self, but the deeper organizing principle that has always been there, buried beneath layers of conditioning. The self is not something you create, it is something you discover, and you can only discover it by removing everything that is not it. The void strips away the false. What remains is true. This discovery changes everything. Once you have contacted the self, once you have experienced the stability and coherence that comes from internal alignment rather than external validation, you can never again be satisfied with the superficial connections that pass for relationship in society. You have tasted something real, and everything else seems like theater. This is why the loner who has completed this journey often appears to be even more isolated than before. They have not become more antisocial. They have simply developed higher standards for what constitutes authentic connection. The sovereign individual who emerges from the void carries what we might call archetypal authority. They no longer need external leaders because they have accessed the internal leader, the self, that guides from within. This does not make them arrogant or self-righteous. In fact, it often makes them more humble because they have seen the vastness of the unconscious and recognized how little the ego truly controls. But it does make them fundamentally ungovernable by external authorities. This is why every totalitarian system, every cult, every institution that demands absolute obedience first seeks to prevent solitude. They keep people busy, keep them connected, keep them in groups where they can be monitored and influenced. Because they understand, even if they do not articulate it, that the individual who spends too much time alone will eventually discover their own authority. And once that discovery is made, external authority loses its power. The Stoic philosophers understood this principle 2,000 years ago. They taught that the goal of philosophy was not to change the external world, but to build an internal fortress that could not be breached by external circumstances. You have power over your mind, not outside events, Marcus Aurelius wrote. Realize this, and you will find strength. This is not resignation. This is the recognition that true power lies in psychological sovereignty, not in material control. The loner who keeps no friends is, in essence, a practicing Stoic. They have built their fortress in solitude. They have learned to generate their own stability, their own meaning, their own sense of purpose without depending on external validation. This makes them extraordinarily resilient. When social exile comes, and it always comes to those who refuse to conform, they do not crumble. They do not beg for readmission. They simply continue, sustained by internal resources that most people never develop. This resilience is itself threatening to the social order. When punishment does not work, when exile does not break the spirit, when isolation does not produce surrender, the system loses its primary tool of enforcement. The loner's thriving in solitude is a form of rebellion more profound than any overt resistance, because it demonstrates that the system's power is illusory. It shows that freedom is possible, that autonomy is achievable, that you do not need society's permission to be whole. But here is the deepest secret, the one that Jung spent his life trying to communicate. Sovereignty is contagious. When one person achieves genuine psychological independence, it destabilizes everyone around them, not because they are actively trying to convert others, but because their mere presence asks a question that cannot be ignored. If they can be free, why can't I? This is why authentic individuals are either celebrated as heroes or destroyed as threats, with no middle ground. Society can tolerate millions of people who pretend to be individuals while secretly conforming. But it cannot tolerate even a few who have genuinely achieved sovereignty, because those few expose the prison that everyone else inhabits. They make visible the invisible chains. And once you see your chains, you must either break them or accept that you are choosing to wear them. Both options are unbearable for most people. The sovereign loner does not seek followers. They do not build movements or start revolutions. They simply live according to their own truth, and that living itself is revolutionary. It demonstrates an alternative possibility. It proves that the social contract is optional, that the rules are negotiable, that there is a life beyond the herd. And every person who sees this and chooses to begin their own journey of individuation weakens the collective's grip on consciousness. This is Jung's final conclusion, his ultimate warning, and his ultimate hope. The future of human consciousness depends not on collective movements or social reforms, but on individuals who have the courage to individuate. He believed that humanity was at a crossroads. One path leads toward greater collectivization, greater homogenization, greater absorption of individual consciousness into mass consciousness. This path leads to totalitarianism, to the loss of human creativity and wisdom, to stagnation. The other path leads toward greater individuation, greater psychological diversity, greater respect for the sovereign individual. This path is harder, lonelier, more psychologically demanding. But it is the only path that preserves human consciousness in its fullest expression. Jung believed that the fate of humanity would be determined by whether enough individuals chose the difficult path of becoming themselves, or whether the pull of the collective would ultimately prove too strong to resist. And so we return to where we began, the loner who keeps no friends. This is not a pathology to be cured. This is a vanguard, a harbinger of a possible future where individuals are respected for their uniqueness rather than punished for their difference. These are the people who have done the work that Jung prescribed. They have descended into the unconscious, integrated their shadow, differentiated from the collective, and emerged as sovereign beings. Are they perfect? No. Individuation does not produce perfection. It produces authenticity. It produces people who have faced themselves completely, accepted themselves fully, and chosen to live according to their deepest values rather than society's superficial expectations. These people will make mistakes, will have flaws, will struggle with the same human challenges as everyone else. But they will face these challenges from a position of integrity rather than fragmentation, from a center that holds rather than a self that collapses under external pressure. If you have recognized yourself in this description, if you have felt the pull toward solitude and wondered whether there was something wrong with you, understand this: there is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are not antisocial. You are undergoing a transformation that most people will never attempt. You are becoming an individual in a world designed to produce replicas. And yes, this path is lonely. Yes, it is difficult. Yes, it requires sacrifices that others will not understand. But it also offers something that cannot be obtained any other way: the knowledge of who you are when all the masks are removed, the experience of psychological sovereignty, the freedom that comes from being truly, finally, authentically yourself. And in a world that grows more homogenized by the day, in a culture that increasingly demands conformity, in a digital environment that systematically erodes individuality, the choice to become yourself is not just personal. It is political. It is spiritual. It is revolutionary. The loner who keeps no friends is not someone to pity. They are someone to study, to learn from, perhaps even to emulate. Because they have discovered what Jung knew and what society fears, that you do not need the crowd to be complete, that solitude can be a path to power, and that the individual who knows themselves deeply is worth 10,000 who merely know how to fit in. This is the message that echoes across Jung's entire body of work, the truth he spent his life trying to communicate through his psychology, his analysis of myths and symbols, his study of alchemy and synchronicity. The goal of human existence is not adaptation to society. The goal is individuation. The goal is becoming conscious. The goal is transforming from a fragment of the collective into a whole unto yourself. And for those rare individuals who answer this call, who walk away from the comfort of belonging into the terror and triumph of solitude, who keep no friends because they refuse to maintain relationships that require them to be false, Jung offers not sympathy, but respect. Because these are the ones carrying the torch of consciousness forward. These are the ones ensuring that humanity remains human, that thinking remains possible, that freedom remains real. Beware of loners who keep no friends, not because they are dangerous to you, but because they are dangerous to the illusions you have been taught to believe. They are living proof that another way is possible. They are evidence that the system is optional. They are embodiments of a truth that society must suppress, that you are already whole, already complete, already free. You have always been. You have only forgotten. And the loner who keeps no friends is simply someone who remembered.